Hello and welcome to the Botanical Cake Studio and the first tutorial of 2022. So today I'm going to show you how to make a Lisianthus flower, and I've created a super simple technique that doesn't require any specialist tools or cutters. So I've included the measurements of the cutters that I've used, but in a bid that you can have a root around in your cutters and find something of a similar size without having to buy something or have the exact ones that I've used. And I'm going to show you how to make a bud, a fully bloomed flower and a couple of leaves to wire them all into a stem. And you'll find that Lisianthus come in all different sort of colours and shapes and different petal counts as well. So once you've mastered the basics, you can then go on to experiment with making different varieties by frilling the petals differently or adding an extra layer of petals as well. So if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the Botanical Cake Studio YouTube channel to stay up to date with all the latest videos. So let's get started. So I'm going to begin by making the pistil, the centre of my flower, and I have a half length of 26 gauge wire here, and I'm just going to bend a little hook in the end of it. Like so. And now I'm going to take some yellow flower paste. So I've coloured some white flower paste here with sugar flower egg yellow. And I'm just going to pinch off a little amount. So it wants to be around about a 5 or 6 millimetre ball. You can vary the size of this slightly depending on your Lisianthus, because all of the centres do sort of vary slightly in shape and size. So I'm just going to roll it into sort of fat sausage shape, and then I'm going to take my pliers and just squeeze a sort of dent in the middle, like that. So you should have this sort of shape, which looks a little bit like a bow tie or something. And then I'm going to dip my wire, the hooked end, into some egg white and then wipe off any excess. You just want to sort of moisten the tip here. You don't want it too wet at all, otherwise it'll get all sticky. And I'm going to insert the wire into the base, and then you can just sort of pinch it and reshape onto the wire until it feels secure. Okay, and now I'm just going to take a little bit of green paste, and you want about a sort of 8 millimetre ball for this bit. So I'm just going to roll that into a ball so it's nice and smooth. And then I'm just going to sort of shape it into a bit more of a rugby ball shape, so it's not perfectly round. It's a bit more like that. And then I'm going to insert my wire through the long end and feed this up towards the top of the pistil. But I'm going to leave a bit of a gap, so there's going to be a small length of wire in between. So I'm just going to pinch the top to kind of secure it a bit, and then you can secure it better around the bottom. So just leaving a little short length of wire in between like that. And now we want to leave this to dry. So now we're going to make our stamen, and I have some 32 gauge wire here, which I've cut into 6, and I just need 5 pieces for 5 stamens. So I'll just take these 5 and leave that one to one side. So I'm going to take my yellow paste again, and I'm just going to pinch very tiny balls. So just need 5 little balls. And I'm just going to feed these onto the end of the wire. You don't need to use any egg white or glue for this, so you don't want to make it too sticky. So I'll just kind of fed it onto the wire to make a sort of little sausage shape, and then actually I think that's a bit too much for that one, so I'm just going to pinch a bit off if you feel it's a little bit too big. And then I'm just going to use my finger just to bend them like that, just to give them a bit of shape. So this is probably about a 2mm ball, maybe between 1 and 2mm. And just put it on the end of the wire, roll it between your fingers to sort of lengthen it into a sausage shape. And then just use your finger just to curve it round like that. So do the same for each one. So a little curve in the end. And this one I'm just going to pinch a little bit off because there's a bit too much on there. And the last one. Okay, and then I'll leave them to dry in the same way that I have the pistil, and then we're going to add some pollen. So my pistil and stamen have now dried up completely, and I'm now going to add some pollen. So I've actually made my own pollen here. I've got some fine semolina or fine cornmeal that I've just added some dust colours to. You can buy ready-made pollen, but I prefer to make my own. I like this fine semolina as it gives a really nice fine texture. So I've coloured it with 2 different colours. I've got just a Squire's Kitchen yellow and a Berberis. So it's a yellow and a sort of orangey colour to get this tone. And I have got some edible glue here as well. Again, I have made this, and I have a tutorial for how to make this on YouTube as well, which I'll link to. So I'm just going to take my pistil and dip it into the edible glue and just wipe off any excess. So I've just dipped the yellow bit in, and now I'm just going to dip that into my pollen and then just tap off any excess. And then I'm going to do the same for each of the stamen. Okay, and then we'll let these dry completely to let the pollen set. So now that my pollen has firmed up, I'm going to tape my stamen to my pistil. So I've just got some half-width white floral tape here, and I'm going to begin by attaching this to the base of the pistil. And then I'm just going to take my stamen one by one and tape them round. And you want them to be about sort of level with the pistil. So with the top of the pistil. So I'm just going to get them around about level and tape to secure. And then you can just bend them into position afterwards. So don't worry too much about the position at this stage. Just want to attach them spaced out nice and evenly around the pistil. I find this easier just to do one by one with this type of flower, just to help to get them nice and even. And the last one. So once they're all attached, I'm just going to tape down the stem And then we can just move these into position. So it should look something like that. And I'm just going to dust a little bit of green onto this bottom part here and onto the wires as well, with the stamen attached. So I've just got a little bit of green dust mixed with some yellow just to sort of give it more of a lighter sort of limey green colour, and just dust it on fairly roughly here. And you just want to make sure that any of that white wire goes to green. Okay, and now we're ready to add our petals. So I've got some flower paste here that I've coloured to sort of pale pinky peach colour, and I've rolled this out to the thinnest setting on my pasta machine, which on mine is a 9. And I've got a rose petal cutter here. This one is a PME rose petal cutter set, and it's 4 centimetres by 2 centimetres. So you want to look for something around this size, even if it's not this exact cutter. And I'm going to cut out 5 of these petals. And then just put the rest of the paste away. And then I'm just going to thin these petals out and stretch them out on my cell pad. So dust them well with corn flour, and then using your ball tool, just sort of widen and lengthen the petals slightly. Don't worry about this bottom end here. We can leave that as it is, because that will help us to secure it onto the centre. So I'm just thinning and sort of stretching the petals out. You do want to make them a bit wider. So I'm going to do the same with each of the petals. And you don't really want them to be a uniform shape, so it doesn't matter if they sort of go into slightly different shapes whilst you're sort of thinning them out. We want it to look as natural as possible. And if you don't feel confident working with 5 petals at a time, if you think they're starting to dry out because you're not working quickly enough, just take a couple out of the bag and work with a few at a time. So my paste is relatively stiff to work with today, because it's quite cold in the studio, so it's just taking a bit of effort to stretch it out. I've got a tiny tear in this one, but I'm not worrying about that. Okay, so now I'm going to take my veining tool, and I'm just going to line it on the petal like that, and just vein each one in the same way, just by pressing it onto the table, like so. So I'm now just going to take a bamboo skewer, and I'm going to run it over the edge of each of the petals just to thin it a bit more and to give it a bit of a frill. So just sit your petal on the edge of your cell pad and take your bamboo skewer at a 45-degree angle and just press it along the edge of the petal. So you're working at an angle. And you'll just see it will just sort of slightly thin it and frill the edge. So do the same with each petal. So the edge of your petal's in line with the edge of the cell pad. And you're applying quite a bit of pressure. So exactly the same for each petal. So now I'm just going to take 5 soup spoons and I'm going to lay each of my petals over the edge of the soup spoon. So you basically want your petal to be sort of curving slightly out at the edge. So you're just hanging the edge of the petal over the end of the soup spoon. And you can have each one bent into a slightly different shape. So just sort of position them slightly different on each of the spoons. So I've got about 1 centimetre or just under hanging over the edge to give it a bit of a bend, and just sort of play around pinching them into different positions until you're happy. And we'll leave them to set up until they're nice and firm but still have a bit of movement in order to shape them around the pistil. But you want this sort of curved edge to be holding its shape. So to make a bud, I've just made a sort of small cone with flower paste, which is about 2 centimetres by roughly 7 millimetres wide. And I've just done that with a bit of flower paste and inserted it onto a hooked end of wire. This is a 22 gauge wire, and I've just let that dry. So I'm now going to take a slightly smaller rose petal cutter from the same set. This one is 3.5 centimetres long by 1.5 centimetres wide. And I'm just going to cut out 5 petals with this pale green paste here. And the buds of Lisianthus, they sort of vary between sort of pale green and yellowy colours to the actual colour of the flower itself. So they start to sort of turn the colour of the petals that the flower will be eventually. So I'll just put my excess paste away. And I'm just going to thin these petals as I did with the main flower. So just really concentrate on making the ends nice and thin, as well as these edges. Okay, so now I'm going to attach my first one onto my bud here. So I'm just going to brush some egg white onto my bud and then a bit onto the petal itself as well. And I'm just going to wrap the petal around the bud quite tightly, but just leaving one side open, because I'm then going to tuck in my remaining petals. So I'm going to brush some egg white onto the right hand side of each of these petals. And then one by one, I'm just going to tuck them onto the bud here, leaving it open each time. So you're just kind of tucking them in with an overlap on each one. So you want them to sort of be fairly evenly spaced around the bud. And then just sort of wrap them and shape them with your fingers. Once you're happy that they're in a nice spiral shape, you can then take your egg white and just start to secure the other side of the petal into position. You can kind of slide them around as you go. You want quite a tight spiral shape for a closed bud. And then if you're making more buds, you can have them more open, so you then just have a play around with having the outside shape a bit more open. So I want this to tuck in a bit more, so I'm just going to tuck in the petal, open up the flap and just close it up again. And just keep playing around with it until you're happy with the shape. You just kind of twist it around in your fingers to give it this nice spiral shape. So don't worry too much about the bottom, you just want to make sure that everything is nice and secure, but we're going to go in and create a calyx for that, so that will be covered. So I just have this sort of opening spiral shape like that, and leave that to dry before we make the calyx. So my petals have now firmed up nicely, so they're holding their sort of bent out shape, but I've still got some movement in the lower part of the petal here. So I'm now going to take my centre and I'm going to apply a bit of egg white onto the base of my first petal. And I'm just going to secure that around my centre. So I've got the base just below the bottom of this green here, and I'm just going to pinch that around to secure it. And then take my next petal, and I'm actually just going to dab a bit of egg white onto the base of the remainder of my petals. And then one by one, I'm just going to attach them in a spiral shape around my centre. So there's just a slight overlap each time. So you want to space them sort of evenly around the centre. And the final one just to close the gap. So just pinch the base until it's all secure. And then I'm now going to leave this, oh, this one's just come down, so let's just reattach that. So in order to let this dry, I'm going to hang it upside down just by bending the end of the wire here and hanging this on, I've got a wire shelf which I'm going to hang it from. So you let that dry and it will keep it holding that nice shape without opening up until it's completely dried, and then we'll add the next layer of petals. So I'm now ready to make my next layer of petals, and I have a slightly larger cutter here. This one is 4.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters wide, and this one actually happens to be from a tulip petal set, but essentially it's 1 centimeter longer and 1 centimeter wider than my previous layer of petals. So I'm going to cut out 5. And then I'm going to stretch them and thin them in exactly the same way as I did for my previous layer. So you want to be widening them again. Okay, I'm now going to vein them in the same way that I did before. So just pressing my veining tool across the whole width of the petal. And then we're going to do the same on the edge with the bamboo skewer as before. So just line up the edge of the petal with the edge of the cell pad and press at a 45-degree angle with your bamboo skewer again. And now we're going to line the petals up on the soup spoons again, curving away the outer edge in the same way as before. So just varying each one slightly so that it has different curves. And then we will let these firm up almost completely before adding them to the flower. So my outer petals are now pretty well firmed up. So I'm just going to add a little bit of egg white to the base of each petal in order to attach it to the main flower. So just dab a reasonable amount just on the base of each petal. And then we're going to arrange them around the flower in the same direction as we did before. And I'm going to start from where I left the last petal from the previous layer. So I'm just going to position this one just slightly further out so you can see the next layer and in between these two petals. So I'll start off with that one there and just gently press it on to the dried layer from before. And then we want to space these evenly around. So add in the next petal and just squeeze it at the base to secure it. So exactly the same with all of them until you get all the way around and you've attached all the petals. So just keep an eye on your spacing as you go around. So I've got one more just to slot in here. And we're going to let this dry upside down again. So if you turn it around the right way and just check that you're happy with the positioning, you can kind of slide the petals slightly if you want to maneuver them at all at this stage. But once you're happy with how they're positioned, if you just turn it upside down like we did before, give everything a really good pinch to make sure it's secured. And then we'll bend this wire and leave it to hang to dry completely before we add the calyx. So my Lisianthus flower has now completely firmed up and I'm going to add the calyx now. First of all, I'm just going to strengthen my wire because this one is quite bendy, so it's not going to support the weight of it anymore. But you can vary the gauge of the wire depending on what you're going to be doing with your final flower and arrangement. So I just got a 24 gauge wire here. No, a 22 gauge wire here, which I'm going to add in. And just take a bit of my green floral tape to do so. Make sure the wire goes right up to the end so that it's supporting the flower head nicely. And I just pulled the tape to release the glue and I'm just going to twist that round the stem here. Okay, and now to make the calyx, I'm just going to take my green floral tape again, and this is a half width floral tape, and I'm just going to cut some lengths probably about 5 centimeters or so long. And I need 5 of these. And I'm just going to line them up on top of each other. And once you've got the ends all lined up, just take your scissors and I'm going to cut a sort of V shape into the end. Like that, so it forms a point. And then I'm just going to separate each one. And I'm just going to pull to release the glue and lengthen it. And then with the pointed end, I'm just going to twist it between my finger and thumb. Just down to the end of the length of the triangle. So it's about 2.5 centimeters length there. And I'll do the same on each one. If you find that you can't get a good grip on the tape, then it can be helpful just to dust a little bit of corn flour on your fingers, and that just helps it to sort of grip on. Okay, once you've done all 5, you just want to make sure the glue is stretched out and released on the other end, and we're going to attach them to the base of the flower here to form the calyx. So you just want a little bit of the wider end poking up there, and then just kind of press it into place to secure it onto the wire. and you want to evenly space these around the bottom of the flower. So just kind of press them to secure it onto the wire. We're going to add an extra bit of tape at the end to help fix it on as well. And my last one. So we'll just put one last piece of tape around the stem just to secure it all in place. Okay, now I'm just going to sort of tease these into position so that they're sort of sitting flush against the flower and then curling back slightly. Like that. And you want to do exactly the same for any buds that you've made as well. So for the final component of my Lisianthus, I'm just going to make a couple of leaves. So I'm just going to use some standard sort of rose leaf cutters here, but the smooth side, and I've just got a sort of universal leaf vein here as well. So I'm going to wipe a little bit of vegetable fat onto my groove board here, and I just have some green flower paste here. So I'll roll my flower paste out. And I'm just going to cut out 2 different leaf sizes to show you. And then I'm going to insert a 26 gauge wire into each one. So I'm dipping the end of the wire in some egg white and insert that into the vein on the leaf. And then I'm just going to thin the edges of my leaves and just stretch them out slightly. And then just take my leaf veiner and press them in. And then I'm just going to leave these to dry on a foam pad just to give them a bit of shape to them. So you can just kind of leave them to dry where the leaves are slightly curling to give them a bit of shape. So I'm just going to add a few little touches of colour here and there just to bring the flower to life a bit. So I've got my leftover green from earlier, and I've got a little bit of cornflower, some beige, some pink and a sort of burgundy colour. So I'm just going to have a little play around and dust some little bits here and there. But this will obviously depend on the colour of your Lisianthus, so it doesn't need to be the same as mine. So I want to sort of have some little green touches at some of the edges. So I'm just putting some really subtle, sort of really pale greeny beige at the edges here. Just here and there. And I think I want a bit of sort of darker pink in there as well. But do have a look at some pictures of Lisianthus and different colourings and try and mimic a picture that you see. And then I think I'm going to do a little bit in the centre here, just to darken it slightly. And then just catching a few of these edges as well. It just helps to make your flower look a bit more three-dimensional by adding these bits of dust colour. And then I'm going to add a little bit of green and beige just to the back as well. And that should be enough. So you can do the same with your buds as well. So I'm now ready to assemble my stem, and I've just dusted my leaves with a sort of medium to dark green and just taped the top of the wire with a little bit of floral tape. And I'm going to begin by taking these two buds and taping them together. So just having them slightly different heights and then taping them fairly near the top of the stem. I'm just using the half-width floral tape as before. So I'll tape them all the way down. And then I'm going to add these to one of my bloomed flowers. So I'm going to position them so they're slightly higher and just add some tape around about here. And I'm just taping down to the bottom of those wires again. And then I think I'm going to add in one more flower just slightly further down the stem here. And I'm actually also going to strengthen the stem slightly. As with more flowers, it's getting a bit heavier, so at the same time, let's just take that off. I'm going to add in another wire here just to help strengthen it all up. So and now I'm going to add in my leaves. So I want them to sit so just a little bit down from where I added the last flower. And I'm going to tape both my leaves in at the same height, just opposite each other on the stem. And then just finish by taping all the way down the remainder of the stem. And that's your finished Lisianthus stem.